Hello again. Today is the last in the series on suffering, and today we're going to look at Habakkuk. And for those of you that have been the Old Testament scholars, you'll know who he is. And I'll be reading pretty much the whole book. It's not a big book, but it's an amazing discourse that the prophet has with the Almighty. And what that says to us about suffering. So it begins, just for some context. Habakkuk was a prophet to the southern tribes of Judah. And for those that heard me speak about Ezra a few weeks ago, Ezra was after the exile. So those that were taken into captivity were allowed to go back to Jerusalem. And Ezra went with them, and they rebuilt the temple. Now, Habakkuk was before the exile. And so the words that he speaks, he's challenging the people of Judah, the southern tribes, to basically get their act together. And he is seeing so much suffering and grief, and it is just horrible. And so in this book, he's crying out to God and he's asking questions. And so I'm just going to read the first part of this little book. Okay. And so I'll start reading in chapter 1, verse 2. Lord, how long do I have to call out for help? Why don't you listen to me? How long must I keep telling you that things are terrible? Why don't you save us? Why do you make me watch while people treat others so unfairly? Why do you put up with the wrong things they are doing? I have to look at death. People are harming others. They are arguing and fighting all the time. The law can't do what it's supposed to do. Fairness never comes out on top. Sinful people surround those who do what is right, so people are never treated fairly. So at this time, the tribes of Judah are ignoring the law, ignoring the teachings of Habakkuk and all of the prophets before them. And God has repeatedly warned them and said, look, listen to me. But they won't. And as a result, there are people suffering at the hands of others. There is no peace. There is no justice. And it's truly miserable. And Habakkuk cries out to God, as I've just read, what's going on? Why am I to look upon death? And so he asks the Lord those things, and the Lord replies, starting at verse 5. Look at the nations, watch them, be totally amazed at what you will see. I am going to do something in your days that you will never believe. You would not believe it even if someone told you about it. I'm going to send the armies of Babylon to attack you. They are very mean. They move quickly. They sweep across the whole earth. They take over homes that do not belong to them. They terrify others. They do not recognize any laws but their own. That is how proud they are. Their horses are faster than leopards. They are meaner than wolves at sunset. Their horsemen charge straight into battle. They ride in from far away. They come down like an eagle diving for food. All of them are ready and willing to destroy others. Their huge armies advance like a wind out of the desert. They gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings and make fun of rulers. They laugh at the cities that have high walls around them. They build dirt ramps against the walls and capture the cities. They sweep past like the wind. Then they go on their way. They are guilty. They worship their own strength. That is the Lord's response to Habakkuk. And Habakkuk is astonished because you're sending in a foreign nation, and it goes on. Habakkuk again goes to God and says, haven't you existed forever? You are my holy God. You will never die. Lord, you have appointed the Babylonians to punish your people. My rock, you have chosen them to judge us. Your eyes are too pure to look on what is evil. You can't put up with the wrong things people do. So why do you put up with those who can't be trusted? The evil Babylonians swallow up those who are more godly than themselves. So why are you silent? You have made people to be like the fish in the sea. They are like the sea creatures that don't have a ruler. The evil Babylonians pull all them up with hooks. They catch them in their nets. They gather them up. So they celebrate. They are glad. They offer sacrifices to their nets. They burn incense to them. Their nets allow them to live in great comfort. They enjoy the finest food. Are you going to let them keep on emptying their nets? Will they go on destroying nations without showing them any mercy? Habakkuk is devastated at the Lord's first response. And it's like, why are you sending Babylon against us? They are evil. And God, you are holy and perfect. How can you look at them? And then the thing that I love about this amazing discourse is Habakkuk says, I'll go up to the lookout tower. I'll station myself on the city wall. I'll wait to see how the Lord will reply to me. In faith and in complete perfect relationship with God, he asks him a question, he tells it, he says it like it is, and then he says, I'm going to wait. I'll go up to the ramparts and I'll just wait for you to respond. And I just love that aspect of the discourse, of the discussion that this man has with God. So here is the Lord's response, and it can be summed up in this verse. Chapter 2, verse 4 says, See, he is puffed up, his desires are not upright, but the righteous will live by faith. God responds to Habakkuk and explains, as the rest of chapter 2 describes God's response. And it actually reminds me of Matthew 23, where Jesus is in the synagogue. This is during Holy Week. And he does the 7 woes. And Jesus challenges the Pharisees and the teachers of the law on their hypocrisy. And in much the same way in this chapter in Habakkuk, God is challenging the people on their sinful behavior and the fact that their sinful behavior has caused the suffering of many others, including murder and theft. And it's just really nasty. And God says, no, because you have chosen to live like this, then judgment will come in the same way. Hence, the Babylonians will be, I guess, allowed to invade and take over the land. However, God's purposes will be fulfilled. And then the third chapter is Habakkuk's praise and his joy and, wow, God, you know what's going on. You understand the situation. and I will choose to trust you. There are things that I don't get, I don't understand, but you are in control, and I will choose to follow you. And the last few verses of chapter 3 in this, I would call it a song of praise. Starting at 17. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vine, though the olive crops fail, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Saviour. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to go on the heights. Habakkuk recognizes the sovereignty and justice of God, even in the midst of his own suffering. And also, the other thing that gets me is that God understands the suffering of the innocents. Because when he says in 2:4 that the righteous will live by faith, that when we choose to trust the Lord, in spite of the difficulties, the challenges, the suffering we're in, God has his hand on us. God is holding us. He is supporting us. And it's beyond our own understanding. So the story of Habakkuk, it isn't a really long, extensive story, but there are two things that really struck me about this story, this discourse. The first is honesty and openness between the man and his God. And the second is God completely and fully understands the suffering that the people are going through. Honesty. Habakkuk just says how it is. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. He cries out to God and says, look, this is happening. Why is this happening? Make it stop. You're God. You're in charge. You're the man. And God responds. And he answers his question. He answers him. And Habakkuk tries again. Yeah, but you're sending the Babylonians. Why are you sending them? And I love that line again in the first verse of chapter 2. I'll wait up here on the ramparts for you to give an answer. I love that. I love that kind of, I don't know what the word is. Someone will sort of text it in. But it's that understanding that I know my God. I know he will respond. I'll wait here for him to answer. That way, when we're struggling, that we can honestly go to God and complain and cry and get angry about what's happening and trust that the Lord will respond. Can we do that? Suffering is something that I'm trying to find the words, because suffering can be, you can almost be a competition. I've gone through this, I've suffered this, I've had that. Or you could pretend that it's not really an issue. It's, I'm fine really, it's not a problem. And we sugarcoat the suffering. We sanitize it. We argue it away. We're not honest with ourselves and we're not honest with God. Yet if we are honest, things change. Things happen. God responds. In my own life, as many of you know, I have heart failure. And this is in the 2 years before COVID, I lost my job and I'm still not able to work because of my condition. And during the time before COVID, all of my friends and everybody I knew, they were my age, they were at work. So I was at home alone for days. And sometimes I just couldn't get out anyway because I felt so unwell and fatigue had just eaten away at me. And so most days I didn't see anyone. And it reached a point one day where I just cried and I said, God, I can't do this. I am so alone. I need help. I need someone to help me, to support me. I need someone. I don't know who that is, but I need someone. And I cried, and it was horrible, really horrible. About 2 days later, I got a phone call from someone, and she said, God has been speaking to me about you for months. And I can't express the utter shock of that phone call. She came round and we talked, and she shared that God had been speaking to her for some time to get in contact with me. And I didn't know this. And she said, I'm here this day every week, and I'm here for you. And we'll just sit and chat, or we'll try and go for a walk or whatever, but I'm here for you. And I cannot express how wonderful that was. In my time of suffering, in my time of grief and sadness and aloneness, when I cried out to God, He responded in the most beautiful way possible. And that friendship has continued, and that support and kindness and prayer support has continued, and it is absolutely wonderful. God knows our suffering. He sees our suffering. And when we're honest with Him and honest with ourselves, He can change things. However, if we shake our fist at God and get angry and get the wrong attitude, there's a slightly different response. Lolu is just going to read the first part of this poem.
At the end of time, billions of people were seated on a great plain before God's throne. Most shrank back from the brilliant light before them, but some groups near the front talked heatedly, not with cringing shame, but with belligerence. Can God judge us? How can He know about suffering? Snapped a young brunette. She ripped open the sleeve to reveal a tattooed number from a Nazi concentration camp. We endured terror, beatings, torture, death. In another group, a Negro boy lowered his collar. What about this? He demanded, showing an ugly rope burn. Lynched for no crime but being black. In another crowd, there was a pregnant schoolgirl with sullen eyes. Why should I suffer? She murmured. It wasn't my fault. Far out across the plain were hundreds of such groups. Each had a complaint against God for the evil and suffering He had permitted in His world. How lucky God is to live in heaven, where it's all sweetness and light. There was no weeping or fear, no hunger or hatred. What did God know of all that man had been forced to endure in this world? For God leads a pretty sheltered life. So each of these groups sent forth their leader, chosen because he or she had suffered the most. A Jew, a Negro, a person from Hiroshima, a horribly deformed arthritic, a thalidomide child. In the center of the vast plain, they consulted with each other. At last, they were ready to present their case.
The characters in this poem have suffered in terrible ways, and I'm sure all of us can be in at least one of those categories. Are we angry at the suffering that we've experienced? If we are, that's okay. It is good. It is a good place to be. Again, I could tell you about the suffering that I have endured. However, this isn't a competition. And indeed, if we spend our time arguing over who has suffered the most, what do you win? What is your prize for suffering the most? None of us are able to have that distinction. And in the second part of this, of what Lolu is going to read, we're going to find out all about who has suffered the most.
Before God could be qualified to be their judge, he must endure what we have endured. Therefore, our decision is that God should be sentenced to live on earth as a man. Let him be born a Jew. Let the legitimacy of his birth be in doubt, so no one knows who his real father is. Give him work so hard that even his family will think him out of his mind. Let him be betrayed by his closest friends. Let him face false charges and be tried by a prejudiced jury and convicted by a cowardly judge. In the end, let him know what it means to be totally alone, completely abandoned by every living thing. Let him be tortured and let him die. And let him die so that there can be no doubt he died. Let there be a whole host of witnesses to verify that it is so. As each leader announced his portion of the sentence, loud murmurs of approval went up from the throng of people assembled. When the last had finished pronouncing sentence, there was a long silence.
We are all blessed to be born in the shadow of the cross. We are under the new covenant. We are under grace. As such, this series brings us full circle back to Christ, back to Jesus. Taya taught when she spoke in the first week, shared the divinity and the eternal purpose of Christ's work on the cross, on how his suffering, his divine, eternal suffering has freed us and given us, has freed us and given us perfect peace. Today, it's dawned on me the humanity of Christ. He knows, he gets it, he has suffered. For me, Jesus was a racial minority, and he suffered because of it. He knows how that feels, and that is the most amazing assurance for me. He gets it, and for all of us, whatever we have gone through, he gets it. He knows, he suffered, he has wept. Because God, in his perfection, is totally divine, but also completely human. He knows. And even though we have gone through all manner of difficult and painful things, and suffering in of itself is complex, know that rather than sticking yourself or trying to stick God into your box, he holds you The challenge is to trust him as you go through your time of suffering. It's for you to hold out for him and let him lead, guide, direct. As believers, we have a responsibility to those around us, to comfort those, to encourage those that are suffering, that are going through difficulty, to help ease the burden that they are carrying, because we're his hands outstretched. I just want to close with Psalm 27, 13 and 14. I am still confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. I was asked to pick a song. And I know that the worship team are going to do a song now. And rather than me pray, I encourage you during the song that's going to be played to be honest with God. Tell him. Don't be afraid. Don't be nervous. Take this time in his presence. Wait on him. Tell him what's going on inside and wait and see what he does.